Welcome everyone to the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Je souhaite à tous et à toutes la bienvenue au mois de la cybersécurité, de sensibilisation à la cybersécurité. Just give me a minute, I will come back. Okay, sorry. So thanks everyone for your participation in this training session. Please note that the training is being recorded. Je remercie tous de participer à cette formation en ligne. La session va être enregistrée. C'est la dernière semaine des activités du mois de sensibilisation à la cybersécurité et toutes nos activités vont être disponibles en ligne très bientôt. Donc, ça va être disponible sur le canal YouTube de l'Alliance. It is our last week of activities related to the Cybersecurity Training and Awareness Month. We are pleased to tell you that we will post all the training on the Alliance YouTube channel. So if you need to watch over again one of the training session, or you want to watch one of the training session you couldn't attend, it will be available soon. So today the presentation is Cybersecurity Policy and Standards Town Hall. La présentation d'aujourd'hui est une réunion sur les politiques et les normes en matière de cybersécurité. I am happy to welcome Scott Baker. He is a manager of sensitive research at UBC ARC. We have also Darcy Hudson, who is a senior cybersecurity analyst at the Alliance. I think we'll have also Jonathan Ferland, who is a chief information security at Calcul Québec. Donc aujourd'hui, nous avons Scott Baker qui est en recherche sensible, en gestion de recherche sensible à UBC ARC. Darcy Hudson, qui est analyste senior en cybersécurité. Et nous aurons aussi Jonathan Ferland de Calcul Québec, qui est chef en sécurité de l'information à Calcul Québec. I am myself Mireille Dastou. I'm a training specialist at the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. Je suis Mireille, je suis responsable de la formation à l'Alliance numérique de recherche du Canada. Je suis en charge des 4 grands domaines qui sont la gestion des données de recherche, la cybersécurité, le calcul informatique de pointe et les logiciels de recherche. So at the Alliance, I overview all 4 pillars, which are research data management, cybersecurity, advanced research computing, and research software. So I will now give the floor to Scott, Darcy, and Jonathan. Je vais maintenant donner la parole à Scott, Darcy et Jonathan. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mireille. And hello, everybody. We have an hour for, which is going to give us a lot of time for some Q&A at the end, I think. But we might even give you some time back into your calendar because it's not a tremendous amount of information. But we wanted to just go over the governance documents, policies, standards, guidelines, procedures that we already have published on the Alliance website. A little bit of a review of where those stand and a couple of new ones that are just being published. That's the main point of this session, to introduce you to those new documents. And then finishing up, we want to just sort of highlight what's coming down the pipe in the future. We have a bunch of new policies and standards that are being worked on currently to give you an idea of what to expect coming soon. And then, as I mentioned, lots of time for Q&A at the end. So we wanted to start with a little bit of a refresher for those who have seen this before. And if you haven't seen this before, it's might be new information about how the governance document hierarchy works within the Alliance and the Alliance Federation. We have several different layers of document types. Policies, they're sort of the highest level. They cover why we do things. They're the sort of the capital P policy, people will often refer to them. They sort of dictate the strategic layer of the governance structure within the cybersecurity documents. Underneath that, we have things that are called standards, sometimes directives, sometimes frameworks. They get into what needs to be done. So they're a little bit more detailed than the policies. They get more into the weeds, but not deep down. They wouldn't specify a particular technology or a configuration of a device. It would say what you need to do, but not necessarily exactly how. And that's going to be the majority of the documents you'll see are standards, because we have a lot more standards than we do policies. Underneath those, we have procedures and specifications. These get into exactly how things need to be done. And they will detail specific configurations, specific items that must be used or should be used, those sorts of things. These first three layers in the hierarchy are all mandatory documents. They're prescriptive. Although inside the document, sometimes we'll have the word must, which means you have to do something, or sometimes we'll have the word should, which means it's a recommendation if at all possible. And then finally, down at the bottom, there's informational documents. These are not prescriptive. They're information to help with the documents above or to provide additional information, suggestions, sometimes best practices. Sometimes there's multiple ways to achieve something that's outlined in a standard or a specification, and the guidelines and resources will help with figuring out what might be the best way to implement it for a particular case. They also can be just general information. And we have a bunch of these. They're usually referenced in the bottom of the governance document itself. So looking back at what is already available and has been for a while, there's a English and French link. This one is the English link on this particular page. That QR code will take you to the same place. The French link is very similar. It's alliancecan.ca/fr/politique. Each one of the documents has an identifier, and these are the ones that have been there since about last year in December. A glossary of terms, which defines all the different terminology that are used in all the other documents. We have a data classification policy, a data handling standard, which describes what to do with data that's been classified according to the policy. There's a vulnerability management standard, which talks about patching, treating vulnerabilities, scanning for vulnerabilities. A cybersecurity risk management policy, which is sort of more applicable to actually dealing with the risk and assessment process, and will be a little bit less of something that the average individual will need to worry about, and a procedure for how to assess those risks. So these have been available now since about December last year, as I mentioned. And as part of this most recent update, we have made changes to these documents, but they're all minor editorial changes. So we went through and just cleaned up the references so that all the documents point to each other using the same sort of terminology, fixed some formatting issues, added commas and semicolons and periods, things like that. So if you've looked at these documents before, there won't be any material changes to them. We did want to call out, though, that a couple of these documents, when they were published last year, specifically the data handling standard and the vulnerability management standard, indicated that there would be a transition period of about 1 year before the documents would come fully into force. They're in force. We're hoping everybody will follow what they say right now, but we weren't expecting everybody to necessarily have that done within the first year. And due to a couple of different delays and ongoing efforts, we're going to keep them in that transition period for at least until the end of the coming fiscal year, so at least until the end of March in 2024. So they are, again, in-force documents, but compliance is recommended rather than required at this point. So by all means, have a look through them, but keep in mind that coming at the beginning of next fiscal year, they will be fully in force and compliance would be expected. A couple other things that we wanted to call attention to. The cybersecurity risk management policy, as I mentioned, is more a directive for the risk management process that's currently ongoing. And it explains how we're going to identify document and manage risks going forward. And there is right now an ongoing effort to do a risk assessment across the entire Alliance Federation. There's a working group that's currently working through that right now. It'll be a major risk register for those who are familiar with the concepts around risk, to look at what are the biggest risks that are impacting the Federation right now, and how should we prioritize and treat those risks going forward. That's going to be an ongoing process for at least probably another 6 months or so. But I wanted to call attention to the fact that it's an ongoing process following that policy and that procedure. So if you do happen to be involved in that, and not everybody will be, but if you do happen to be involved in that process, you can have a look at the policy and procedure on the page as well if you want to get more information. So I'm just checking, and I don't see Jonathan here yet. Maybe what we can do, I don't know, Ben, do you know this one quite well? Would you like to speak to it rather than me? I can try and muddle through. Oh, I can't hear you. I can see you're not muted.
Sorry, I'd probably defer to Darcy on this because he was more of a co-author on this particular document than me. Is that a burden, Darcy?
No, I haven't read it in a while.
We can both try and muddle through it.
That's fine.
Okay, I'll hand it over to you, Darcy. Thanks.
Sure. So the system logging and security monitoring standing basically outlines how we should do logging and monitoring on all our devices. So whether it's like a switch or a server, some kind of appliance, it basically lays out what we should be doing to collect logging and metrics out of that system. So things like access and authorization needs to be logged. Authentication attempts should be logged. Use of privileges or attempted use of privileges should all be logged. Things of that nature. And it also defines the sharing of logs, I think, is a big part of it. How we should centralize logs, getting off of that specific device into some kind of central server. And then it goes another step to say we should also be sharing these logs in some way with the whole Federation, so we can all look at the same sort of unified picture of logs from across all the Federation services from one single kind of tool or tooling. And then it also defines how you should share logs amongst each other. So what the default sharing level of, or the default sharing permissions of those logs should be, who owns the data, and how you share that amongst the other users. Some data might be shared like to the whole Federation, but it might have different sharing requirements. So you can say, yes, it's available to everyone, but it's not available for everyone to see by default. There's other controls placed on top of those logs based on data classification of those logs. So those are kind of the main points, I think, for that new standard. Is there anything else in the standard that you wanted to
I was just going to call out for people's benefit, because I can't remember if any of the other standards have touched on this before, but one of the definitions that's used in the standard to talk to log sharing is the TLP, the traffic light protocol, at an amber level. If you've never seen that before, I'll drop a link in the chat. It's commonly in use in cybersecurity circles. It's not necessarily in use everywhere else as commonly, but it basically identifies several levels of sharing, with either like a green or a clear being something you can share with pretty much anybody, versus a red, which you can actually only share with the people who were in the meeting where the information was originally disclosed. And there's other levels in between. And we've defaulted to a TLP level of amber for log sharing unless otherwise stated. So that's an important one to keep in mind if you're looking at or curious about what would be shared. You'll notice actually, in fact, that all of the standards also have TLP green on the top, which is basically indicating they're publicly accessible, which is why we have them posted on the website, for example. So I think I just want to call attention to that one.
Perfect. Thanks.
And maybe I'll pass it back to you again, Darcy, for
Sure.
the network security standard.
Yeah, so I'm the lead for the network security working group under the NSC, and in developing the new network security standard, we worked very closely with the network national team to kind of make sure that this standard is in line with things that they're comfortable with, as sort of the main group in charge of networking around the Federation. So the main section of this new policy or this new standard deals with requirements for network security zones and controls for moving data between them. For anyone who isn't familiar with network security zones, they're basically a logical way to group services with the same risk tolerance together to just do access controls a little bit easier, to be able to manage these large networks a little bit in an easier way based on risk. So for example, a user login node and an administrative node in the clusters would probably live in different security zones. So they would have different rules allowing traffic to flow between them. So, preventing users from connecting to it and stuff like that. And then part of this document specifies some encryption, intrusion detection, and some pretty high level statements about device configuration requirements for devices that are involved in the transfer of data that's classified high or very high. So there is some stuff in there about encryption and intrusion detection, but a lot of the data that we deal with on the clusters, especially when it's moving in and out of Lustre and between jobs, it's not necessarily encrypted, and that's not something we were looking to impose on anybody. But when you are dealing with some of these higher level data classifications, like high and very high, that is something we felt was necessary. And lastly, there's some requirements for keeping network diagrams up to date for things that that network administrators or system administrators are in charge of, because when you're talking to somebody else about this, or there's some kind of incident going on, it's a lot easier for people to look at a diagram and get context on what you're talking about when they're not as familiar with the architecture of these systems. So that's kind of the last main point in the standard.
Thanks, Darcy. So those are the new documents and the ones that we already have with minor updates. Those two new ones are going to be new for everybody. So please go and have a look at the logging and the networking standards that are just been released. They were just posted to the website on Friday. But we wanted to also call attention to several others that are currently in the works. These are in various states of draft at this point, but I think you can expect to see all of them coming within the next 6 months or so. We'll do another session like this where we introduce all these documents. But just to run through what they are, the cybersecurity policy itself is probably going to be the highest level policy that relates to all of this governance associated with cybersecurity. And it really is the overarching document that will define the framework and map for all the cybersecurity standards, policies, procedures. It will have to be approved at the highest levels, and it won't necessarily get into a lot of detail other than sort of identifying the fact that the other standards exist, how they'll be written and how they'll be approved. And most importantly, it will define accountabilities and responsibilities across the Federation for the cybersecurity program itself. So it's a fairly important document. It's been in the works for quite a while. We're still ironing out the finer details of it, but hoping to have it back before our approval body, which is the Cybersecurity Advisory Council, also known as CSAC, in the next couple of months. A couple other documents that are in the works. There's two physical security documents, one that is specifically around data centers. So it looks only at the physical security of the data center itself, and another one that looks at physical security around the workplace. So that covers also things like bring your own device, which is incredibly common across the Federation, and outlines, general best practices that most people are probably already doing anyway. But things like making sure that you have a lock screen on your mobile device if you're using it to access Alliance Federation resources, or making sure that your workstation account has a lock on it, things like that. There's also an asset inventory standard in the works. All these ones here are well into their draft stage, which defines how we will look at what devices we have across the Federation and actually capture that into an asset inventory. And it's a very important thing because it's hard to secure things that you don't know you have. It's one of the first things that any consulting group who comes in to do a security assessment will ask, please let us see your asset inventory. And we haven't had a standard for how that's going to work up until this point. So this standard is hoping to try to articulate that and find the right balance between collecting too much information into an inventory, but also not having enough. So that's always the challenge with these sorts of things. And then finally, at the last account renewal phase for RAC, we did do an update to the terms of use. And it was a very minor update that addressed a couple of sort of pressing issues associated with the terms of use, but it was sort of a stopgap because we needed to do it quickly. We have a much larger update planned for the terms of use that will kind of rework it from the ground up to be a little more modern and fit in with the rest of the policies and standards that we've been working on over the last couple of years. So that's something else that's also in the works, although it's not started getting into the drafting stage just yet. So it may be a little further off, but we'll again be notifying everybody once we get to the point of having that new terms of use ready, because it will impact all users and all ADPs across the Federation. That's about it for what's coming next. So wanted to give, and we have lots of time, as much as we need, really, hopefully, for questions, but also just to sort of highlight what the next steps are. All the policies and standards are always going to be posted to this same page, both the English and French links, as was mentioned. So any updates will be posted there. Each document also has a change log, so you can see what's changed in it. It doesn't go into like every single line that changed. It will indicate whether there was a major change, roughly what changed. And as it stands so far, none of the documents have any major changes. It's just that they were first published and then these minor editorial changes for some of the documents. But as time progresses and we make more sort of wholesale changes to documents, if anything significant changes to the document's intent, we'll be sure to mark that in the change log so you can track it over time. We're hoping that all Alliance DRI professionals are going to familiarize themselves with these documents. So the new ones that are just released, please have a read through, see how they impact what you do and learn more about what's there. And we recommend all the users in the Alliance Federation do the same thing. Some of these documents, especially the data classification policy, can be really useful. If somebody's got a particular classification of data, they can see how we will treat it maybe differently within the Federation and also understand how to articulate to us what classification their data should be. But it can also be very useful if you're working with a third party or your institution who's asking what sort of security procedures and policies are in place with the Alliance Federation. Now you have something you can point them to and say, these documents articulate what is in place, what our expectations are. And usually that's quite helpful. Finally, feedback is always welcome. We can't necessarily make changes to policy on a whim, but we record all feedback that we receive. We have a feedback log for every single document, and we will get to it as soon as we can, or provide a response or answers to questions at any time. So while we've got this opportunity now to go through some questions right here, you can reach out at the email address listed, security@tech.alliancecan.ca at any time. And we'll get back to you and try to answer your question or your feedback. If you think there's something in a standard that needs to change or you see a mistake or an error, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So encourage everybody to always use that opportunity to reach out. So with that, if anybody has any questions about anything that we've talked about so far today, feel free to either drop it into chat, or if you're comfortable, you can unmute and speak to us directly. We've got almost half an hour if we need it to answer any questions you might have.
Excuse me, I have a question. Thank you for your
Yes.
presentation. That was real good. You mentioned something about the timeline of the adhering to policies and implementing the standards. But I missed that. When would be necessary and mandatory to be in place, and we have in the alliance and the all federation?
Sure. So with the exception of data classification and vulnerability management, all the policies and standards are currently in force and mandatory now. But those two, we've held off and put them into a transition period just because they required more work to implement. Not all the tools were in place when they were originally published, and we didn't want people to feel that they were going to be, non-compliant from the day we published the policy or standard, just because they hadn't seen it until that day. So those two are still in a transition period, and I mean, we hope everybody will comply with them as soon as they're able. The expectation for those would be, I think at this point, planned for the next fiscal year, so April 1st of 2024, to be the end of the transition period. But with the exception of those two policies, all the rest are in force right now.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Any other questions? Well, unless somebody jumps in.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Scott, Darcy, and Ben also a little bit. We are already at the end of the Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so it's time for the participants to send us feedback surveys, and we have also a quiz to test your knowledge at the end of the month. So I will share the link to the quiz in the chat, and also I will share the link to the Alliance newsletter. So the Alliance newsletter is a way for us to share events, call for participation, and also funding opportunities. It's a good way to keep contact with us. So please register to the Alliance newsletter to receive the information. Now you can also, on your CCDB account, just click to accept to receive relevant communication for the Alliance users of the cloud cluster, etc. So please accept to receive the communication so we can share with you what's up next.